Hey everyone, Dr. Alan Christianson here, and I'm super glad to have my friend Alex Jamieson. So here's the occasion. We've both got a couple of books coming out, and they are so intertwined. We're talking about really similar concepts from very different levels. And we thought it'd be a blast just to hang out with you for a bit and enjoy some time discussing the topics about how Alex came through her story and how this book came about, and kind of my medical story about this one, and the whole tie-in between being at a place of ease and really reversing all these things that are putting us in a state of chronic stress, and how it can really happen. So how's that?
That's great, Alan. I am so excited. I love this idea of two people who are like super health and nutrition nerds coming together, loving each other's books and saying, oh my gosh, they're coming out like pretty close to each other within a month of each other. And people could honestly like get both of these books and just have them in tandem to help them come to terms with and come to love their bodies again on, like you said, a couple of different levels. So
Yeah.
I've got my copy. Now this is an advanced copy, so it looks a little different from what you'll get in the bookstore or on Amazon. This is my Adrenal Reset Diet, which has become my Bible. If you could see the amount of underlining that's going on. It's really exciting. Oh,
And
and
check
there.
this out. Women, food, and desire. And this, I got to say, I loved it. I wouldn't change a thing. But as a guy, I got a lot out of this. So guys out there, this we could do this also. you could you could do it both ways. There you go.
I love it. Well, every time I tell a man what the title of the book is, he goes, I like all three of those things. So you never know. You never know. Yes, it's kind of written to a woman, but a couple of dudes have read it, including yourself, and they've both said, you know what, this is going to speak to men as well.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. Now, Alan, I wasn't kidding when I said that the Adrenal Reset Diet it's really been helping me so much. And I know that you and I both came to this work because of very personal journeys, our own struggles to find health and to be at home in our bodies. And it's not always easy to find the answers.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to share a bit about like how you came to focus on adrenals as so important. Why were you inspired to write this book?
It was adrenals or it was astrophysics. It was kind of close, but this goes way back.
Which one's going to have a bigger audience?
Well, probably at about age 10 or 11, it was the astrophysics was a strong contender. But honestly, just being called out about being a fat kid and realizing how much pain and stigma and during adolescence, how important all that stuff started to become. Before then, I was a nerdy fat kid and I didn't care. I was pretty happy with my stars in space and all that, and nerding out with Carl Sagan, and I was pretty blissed out. But somewhere along the way, I decided that I was concerned about how others thought of me, and I was compelled to kind of take the skills I had to learn and try to figure out how to improve my health and how to dive in this. And I was able to make some differences. I saw some changes that helped. And wow, I was really compelled realizing that stuff that I figured out as a kid with library books was not stuff that doctors gave to me. I think they were always well-intended, but nothing really helped. And I was blown away at what a gap there must be and how much suffering there must be that people have that could be closed by just having knowledge to apply.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that you and I have talked a little bit about the kind of bumpy road to health, to healing. And it's so challenging when you're looking for answers. You're trying to figure it out. I have spent hundreds of hours in libraries myself over the years. I mean, thank goodness for libraries.
Oh, for
I'm
sure.
so glad they're actually experiencing a renaissance, because where else can you go and just see all the options available to you and explore new ideas that you can't really figure out online? It's a different experience. But you tried a lot of different things. And this is something that you and I have in common, that you tried a ton of diets, you experimented, what was that process like? How did you go from like trying one diet and discovering, okay, this isn't working? Did you ever get wrapped up or knotted up about that?
Oh, geez. To the nth degree. The funny thing is the version that a lot of folks might have heard, I talked about in the book, was the simple part about, 12-year-old Alan and losing some weight, getting athletic. And it was totally cool. It happened. The stuff I did then was pretty simple and basic. I cut out sugar and I cut out bread and I exercised. I just did it slowly and gradually and consistently. But that was probably as much complexity as there was to it. But then, boy, somewhere along the way as a teenager, it kept, I don't know, I kept cutting out more and more things. And I think somewhere along the way, I was really trying to fix things that food wasn't the answer for. I think it was more just like trials and stress of life and moving and whatnot. And I think I kind of look back to the past positive things I'd had from modifying my health. And it's almost like, boy, that worked last time. Why can't I just do that again, further, harder, deeper? And and somewhere along the way, I started getting unhealthy. It became too restrictive. And still with that mindset that this was being caused by something extra I was doing or something I was doing wrong, I kept trying more and more complex regimes. And
Yeah.
You've been there. You can really spiral. And I think too, this is weird, but there's a certain amount of endorphins or self reward that you get from following a difficult path. And if you do a complicated dietary regime that's involved and very restrictive, in some way you get emotional rewards because you've attained this attempted goal. And
Right.
even if what you're doing is nutritionally not good for you in the long term, you can feel better in a lot of ways because you're now on the true path,
Right, right.
And at some point, that positive euphoria becomes so disconnected from your nutritional inadequacies that
Yeah, and that speaks to something I think you and I also share, which is a real love of learning. I've always considered that a real strength for myself. Actually, I considered it a distraction for a long time. Now I consider it a strength. Now I see, oh, that's probably a good trait to have for me. So it's like brain candy. You're like, oh, a new idea. Oh, I should try that. Oh, this thing. But in a way, we get disconnected from our bodies. It's all about the mental frameworks, the rules, the constructs, not how is this working for me? How do I feel?
mm-hmm. And I loved your book so much because you took that to so many other levels, not just what's working, how am I feeling, but what's really behind this? And what is this really an attempt to fill? And what are other ways that I could do that might serve me better? And
Yeah. And it's such it's like you don't know what you don't know. I know I don't know anything about astrophysics. But I mean, except I've been watching Cosmos with Neil deGrasse
cool.
Tyson, which is like the
Love
best series ever. Yeah, watching that with my 7-year-old kid, that's oxytocin at its best. But there's a lot of stuff I didn't know about. And that's what I freaking loved about your book. There was so much about the underlying causes of stress, of imbalance that I hadn't even considered. And I geek out on this stuff. So, learning about sleep patterns, how to reset sleep patterns in less than a week. You have some ideas and some tools that I had never even come across. And I know for me and for every mom out there, sleep is like that brass ring, that golden, the end of the rainbow. You're trying to get there and it just seems elusive. And you have some incredible strategies around this.
It can improve. And along the tie-in about, you mentioned the cravings, how many are compelled towards that. One thing that I brought out in this, I think is a newer concept, is that our whole stress response is so tied into our mental emotional state for sure. And at the same time, a lot of invisible things can heighten that. So people have legitimate upset and fear and angst and these issues. But what we haven't really heard just yet is that there's a lot of invisible factors that hit that same button that make it all worse. You know,
Hmm.
you tell people about the pollutants we're exposed to in processed foods, and these things, it's all cumulative. So they're cumulative along with our relationship struggles and our financial pressures and
Right.
our worries about our time frames. So the more factors we have that are pushing us out of our homeostasis, the less resilient we become and the worse it all gets.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I know I just want to underline, reiterate this fact that everyone who's had a baby in the last 10 years and you've gone through a couple of years of sleep deprivation, that sweet, sweet torture of that little adorable nugget that you so are in love with, it may set off or exacerbate this hormonal imbalance that kind of becomes a downward spiral that's
Yeah.
really, really hard to get out of if you're not really aware. So I definitely recommend the book for anyone who's feeling more stressed out and grumpy and sleep deprived than they are starting to think might be appropriate.
And we're often taught in our culture that suck it up, pop an Ambien, move on with your day. And
Right.
I talked about a study in that book. This one still blows me away. So, intermittent use of a medication like Ambien for someone who's heavier corresponds to a ninefold increase in mortality risk. So, 9 times the risk. Now, if you're not heavier, it's a 4.5-fold increased risk. So, here's the kicker. So, intermittent use. So what would you think what would you think intermittent use might mean? Like doses per month, maybe?
I don't know, once a week?
Huh?
Once a week?
Yeah. Yeah. A few times a week here and there. I would kind of think of it something like that. So check this out. In the study, intermittent use was defined as 18 doses or more per year.
Wow.
Yep. So basically you touch the stuff and you die. You got to
Holy
find it next to your bed.
moly.
That's all that it takes pretty much.
Wow. Okay,
Uh,
when you put it in that context, buying one of those little light boxes to I got one on your recommendation. I got a light box. I've been sitting with it 15 minutes every morning. Been upping my vitamin D. And it's so funny because I talk about these same things in Women, Food, and Desire.
there was a whole chapter on sunlight in the book.
Yeah.
There is.
And I talk about it from the benefits of it, biochemically to us as humans, but I was coming at it from even more of a spiritual, emotional level.
Sure.
That and I have to say, I have a lot of people who come to me and they say, I have an emotional eating problem. I'm like, hey, welcome to the human race. We are all emotional eaters. There is emotion with everything we do. If we didn't have emotion with food, we'd be robots. So it's not a bad thing to have emotions around food. It can actually be one of the best, coolest things about life, sharing food with people you love. It can be awesome. But sunlight, movement, sex, intimacy, all these other human experiences, they make us whole. They make us who we are. And we're so lacking. We're missing these things.
You know,
Um,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, one thing that I just got a gush that I loved about your book too is that we often think about things almost from like like a medical slash military strategy. What is the bad thing we need to conquer? If is cortisol the enemy? How do we zap cortisol? I'm like, well, no, there's this whole flip side. There's this whole idea about what are the positive things we need to heighten. And your book was so rich in that about really engaging your enjoyment in sensuality and healthy intimacy and food and really a proper sense of strategic hedonism almost. But that's really lacking, and that's a very important side because whatever we focus on is going to grow good or bad. And if we're focusing all the time on things we do not want, we're not going to get away from that. But if we can put our energies onto the positive things that serve us, and how do we do more of that? We're creators that can really amplify things.
Absolutely. I love that you said hedonism. I call myself a healthy hedonist. As much as I love and am fascinated by and always learning about the world of functional nutrition and medicine, I'm also fascinated by the world of positive psychology, which is the focus on what's right with you. What are your strengths? how can we savor, feel gratitude for, you know, so much of medicine, whether it be psychology or, MDs in a doctor's office, has been focused on what's wrong, what do we need to fix?
Hmm.
And yes, that's absolutely appropriate in so many cases. But what, when you can develop and self start this feeling of gratitude and being in the moment and loving your life, even when you're sick, it can really be that thing that turns the tide. It,
For
it can be
sure.
so powerful, which is why I love to talk about cravings and desires so much, because we don't just crave sugar or salt or fat. I mean, okay, yes, I do. I crave those things. They're all amazing. They're delicious. I'm human. I have taste buds. But we crave so much in this life. And when we cut those possibilities out, when we say, I'm not going to allow myself to have any of those pleasures until I lose 40 pounds and I get my stuff together, no, have those things now. And then you might be more likely to get the rest of your health and your well being on the right track.
Yeah. Have them and also look deeply. What are they metaphors for? What is it that's really, really behind that? And a cool thing, a way I think our books are great complements. We got to talk further about ways to bundle or package this, but part of it is being out of a chemical addictive loop, and part of it is that we have these biological survival responses that get triggered, and part of it is we've got these deeper yearnings that our culture does not really give us immediate vehicles or language around following and pursuing. Once we've met our basic survival needs, it's inevitable that we think, well, what next? And this whole
Yeah.
survival angst surfaces. And we need to have methods of delving into that and really
Mhm.
exploring that further. And at the same time, our body is subject to the laws of gravity and the laws of physics and biology. So we've got these things that can push us and affect our psychology as well. And that's the amazing thing, is that our mind, this experience of consciousness, this experience of awareness, it's the most ephemeral, mysterious thing. And at the same time, that a six-pack of beer will change that experience.
Right.
So it's
Right.
such an intangible thing, and yet it's influenced by the biological physical world. There's no way of escaping that. So the beauty of the books both is that I really just did the briefest touchstones on some of those concepts, and yours took that into such great clarity and depth and language.
Mm.
So it really does make sense to do the basic steps to prepare and stabilize your chemistry, because it can limit you, but ultimately it is not the salvation. I think about your chemical physical health as a barrier to where you want to go to, but it's not the ultimate rocket that takes you there. It's got to be lined up and working, but once it is, then you need to really understand your journey and your mission and how to proceed with that.
Right. Why do you want to feel well in the first place? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's certainly, I've been there, you've been there too. There's certainly, most people are in the place where, like, I just need to feel good enough. Like, I need to get back to that base level of health where I can keep my eyes open all day, where I don't feel like I'm in pain all the time. There's that. But what do you want beyond that? And it's so interesting on this journey. And I talk about so many clients that I've worked with over the last 15 years now in the book, where asking that question, like, what do you really want?
What's someone's typical response to that?
Stunned silence.
They really hadn't thought of that ever or much, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. We've all, and I've certainly done this myself. We get on a track of what we see everybody else doing, or what we think we should do, or what we've been told we should go after. And it's so interesting once you can extricate yourself from that rat race a little bit. Most often, what people want is really simple. It's like, I want friends. I want to hang out with my friends. I want to do this thing that I'm really good at and, like, help people with it. Or I want to create this thing. It's not often some crazy huge thing. I mean, it really comes down to the simple basics of what we've been told, what we see on those inspirational posters and postcards. I guess once you've been through a real healing struggle or healing journey, it becomes a little bit more clear once you come out the other side of it.
Somewhere along the way, I recently realized that we've got three modes of our time. We've got, and the first two, I would argue, for most of us, might make up just about all of it. We've got automated activities. So you wake up, here's what you do in the morning, you go to school, you go to work, you prepare for the family, and that covers a lot of the day. Once the main automated tasks are over and wrapped up for the day, most of us then go into distraction, to culturally normative distraction. That's television, that's social media, that's entertainment, that's some passive activity. But between automation and distraction, there may not be much left else. That may be the bulk of time. I mean, a lot of someone's life. Yeah. So I think the idea of having, I think in my schedule, it's like white space. I schedule in white space to where I'm going to be somewhere cool and comfortable that I enjoy, and there's no agenda.
Wow.
And that's what awesome. That's what you were talking about, is really people want to have a deeper experience. But part of that trick is to not always be in automation or distraction.
Right. And it's very challenging when, especially in this culture, I'll speak for myself as a Yankee United Statesian, that we're very, we totally define ourselves by what we do. And if we're not making the grade, making the bonus, reaching the benchmarks, we're really hard on ourselves, and tend to think that our lives have been worthless. I know it's true for men and women across the board. And I wonder, maybe through this process of people reading both Go Get Both Women, Food and Desire and the Adrenal Reset Diet, folks, this process, maybe we can help people get to the space where they just feel good enough as themselves, where they feel good in their bodies. They feel confident and competent and have that sense of resiliency. Like, wow, I healed myself. It'd be a great place.
And oftentimes that journey, there's benefits from outcomes, but there can also be huge benefits just from perspectives, just from new perspectives. So I think a cool thing from the books, one of which is that by really getting a good sense about what your cravings mean, you get this shift in perspective that, wow, first off, I'm not alone. Okay, this is not just some weird thing I've been suffering with that I've been quiet about. You also get a sense that I'm not broken. This is not some error, some fault on my part. This is quite natural. But then also that this is something that is valid. There's some real need. So there's this huge amount of just vindication of the experience. And for many people, there's so much pain and shame wrapped up into it that even before there's been transformation, that vindication is huge and is healing. One message that correlates that I wanted to make very clear in my book, I wanted to talk about things like the fact that chimps are getting obese. I wanted to talk about that because I wanted there to be just total vindication that weight gain is not blame, that people struggling with their health on a more physical level, that it is not because of their shortcomings. It is not because they have not reined in their cravings properly. It's not because they are weak-willed. There are these larger forces afoot that are shifting the globe. So I think there's big messages people can get of just vindication. And that alone, before you reach some outcome from following the steps, for example, that alone is a huge shift in health and well-being.
Yeah. And I know sometimes people feel overwhelmed when they start realizing, wow, I've been eating toxic food. I've been drinking toxic water, the air, it can feel really scary and overwhelming to see the reality. And I think that might be one reason why people don't reach a place of wanting to transform their health until they hit bottom often, because it seems too overwhelming to even take on. But I love that one of the first things in your book talks about taking that shame away. It's not your fault. That so much of what we've been taught has gotten us to this place. We've been enculturated to eat a certain way and think a certain way about our bodies. And, if there's any villain here, I like to, point at the diet industry. That's just my own thing, that we've been in this body dysmorphic, body shaming culture for a long time. And that if we're not perfect, we're damaged. And that automatically sets up this biochemical war in our bodies when we're constantly thinking, those 40% of your daily habit thoughts that are negative, that sets you into a stress state. I mean,
Yeah.
so the wider awareness of the images that you take in, the thoughts that you have, just as important as where your food comes from.
Speaking of wider images of thoughts and impressions that come in, another thing I loved about your book was the discussion about the Ayurvedic doshas. And I don't think you knew this, but I've done tons of training in that. And I've actually got a family member who's very big in that community, one of the big pioneers in that community. So,
great.
But the relevance from that world was that they talked a lot about how we know about feeding our physical body through our food, and how there's distinct patterns of need, where some need more cooling, some need more warming or moisturizing, these distinct patterns. But also something that really, I think you brought out too, about someone's impressions and what they take in and what they feed their mind, what we feed our emotional bodies, what we feed our subtle bodies, what are we taking in that nourishes that? Is it the evening news, or is it natural settings? So, and feeding has so many metaphors, physically and also our mental and emotional selves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I can't tell you how excited I am for the people who are going to get your book. like really, the adrenals they're just these little organs that haven't gotten enough attention. And they are the key to so many of the diseases and the unwell masses who have been trying so hard. People really are working so hard. They're trying to eat right. They're trying to do it right. And they've been missing this key piece of information. Mm-hmm. So I know people are going to read this book. They're going to read your book and they're going to say, oh, got it. Something to focus on.
I have this vivid memory of when it kind of fell into place. I had been spending just hours and hours on all these journals about obesity and weight gain and global trends. I had a physiology professor who spent about 2 weeks with our class in medical school. This was in early 90s when there was just some of these numbers starting to show up. And he went through all the data up to that point on what was known. And at the end of the 2 weeks, one of my classmates said, oh, he could have told us that fat people were lazy liars, because that was honestly the conclusion of the research. That was like a synopsis of it. They had all these complex ways of putting it, like the Mona Lisa hypothesis, lacking sympathetic activation, all this stuff. But that's what it came down to, is people misrepresented their food intake. So I've been pouring through all the new data about the factors that drive it. And all these researchers have these competing theories. One says it's the fructose, one says it's the obesogenic toxicants, one says it's the diurnal disruptors, and they're competing theories, and any one of them explains a lot of it, but no one of them explains all of it. And I was really at an impasse. Before this point, I was pretty wed to the obesogen theory, really thinking that it was all about these biological metabolic disruptive chemicals. They were the sole explanation. You want to know what wrecked that for me?
What?
We went, so a bunch of years ago, we did Christmas in Thailand. And part of the time was Bangkok and Chiang Mai and Phuket. But so we first ended up in Bangkok, and you could not breathe the air. I could not imagine it being more polluted, and yet everyone around was like Skitty Mini. So, but there's a lot of concrete ways in which any one of those theories has strong exceptions. So I was hiking out from backpacking with my son, and I was so frustrated because I wanted to really get some clear answers and get some data out that make a difference on this. And all the big theories were dead ends. They would not explain it well enough. And I was really pissed. This was twisting in my head, and I just could not get around it. And then I started realizing I was hiking out. I know I could go back to exactly where I was in the desert when this came to me, but all these things shared the same mechanism. They're not all the same cause. And this also includes our cravings, our mental emotional stress, our well-being. all these things push our bodies into this storage state, and they make us go into survival mode and shift how we manage our stress hormones, and we store everything. And we stop burning, we start storing. And
Right.
that was like the one piece of the puzzle. So the next thing was, great, we can't change all these elements. We can't change all the triggers. So what can we do easily to shift that? And I realized that, you can manipulate cortisol in a good way by just changing your carbohydrate timing. So why not just structure that to rebuild that rhythm?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, the more we have clarity about ourselves and our journey and our needs and our cravings, we also diminish that total load of the stress response. We move out of that storage state back towards survival. And the sad thing is, for so long, people with these struggles have been told that, they're weak-willed, they're not trying hard enough, they're not telling the truth, you're not doing it right. And that only compounds it. And then you take being in that state, and then you plug your body's geared up for famine, your body's in survival mode, and you take away your food. How's that going to help?
Right, now I'm going to starve you.
Right.
That'll help.
So the secret, the way to get out, is actually not a way of Spartan discipline. The way out is through compassion and comfort and security and all the things that you give people tangible roadmaps on how to achieve.
Yay, good. I'm so glad that a doctor's telling me it's okay to have more fun and pleasure in my life.
That's what moves the needle. That's what we really need.
True, it's true. So you heard it here first, folks. Prescription for fun and joy and ease and realness. I guess real food, real interaction.
Yeah.
I'm really so excited for your book, Alan. I'm so excited for the people it's going to touch, and I hope that I wonder, are there additional resources that people will be able to get around the book when it comes out?
Well, they're going to need to know about managing their cravings, for one thing.
They are. How are they going to do that?
I got to get my cover back up here again. Yeah, there we go. No, this is cool stuff. And I mentioned as a guy that this was a big part of my journey too. That's a pitfall as well. You can go down this health journey and you can wreck your health from it. You can get too narrow and too focused, and things can get harder. So it's a matter of taking it with a certain sense of equanimity, doing what you can do and not being ignorant. We've got to be a conscious consumer to be healthy nowadays, but going into it with the sense of knowing that your intent and your spirit and your physical state is probably a bigger factor for the outcome. One thing that blew me away, there have been many studies in which you've been able to compare how you feel versus what goes on chemically and which one's a bigger needle mover. One of the most pressing that I've seen was like the Chernobyl study that I talked about in the book. People that stayed behind, the world's worst environmental disaster ever, worst man-made disaster, 1986, 300 times the radiation of Hiroshima, was unleashed at once. Hundreds of thousands of people were evacuated. They lived lives as refugees. They really had no good resources to take them in. Their lives were tough afterwards, but some would not go. So it was this natural experiment of which one, by comparing the people afterwards, an experiment of which one wrecks your health worse, living next to Chernobyl, literally, or living like a refugee for decades. And the crazy thing was that being away from radiation, being in reasonable safety and security, but not being in your homeland, not being at peace, had a bigger negative effect on your health, like more mortality, than being in the shadow of the worst man-made disaster ever.
Yeah.
So to be aware of your choices, but do not stress about them. Put more focus onto feeling good.
Perfect. So heal your adrenals and then have fun and go after your desires.
For sure.
1 + 2 = happy life. There you go.
Oh, good stuff.
Yeah. Alan, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to speak with you every time.
It was a blast talking with you, Alex, and your book's going to change so many lives. It's already touched mine in a deep way, and I'll be really excited to share this with others.
That's so cool. So where can people go online to find out more about your book? Where should they order it?
Easiest thing to stay in touch is Dr. Christianson, Christianson, drchristianson.com. We're actually going to give a bunch of these away. I'm so jazzed about really letting people be vindicated on their path that
Yeah.
we're giving away thousands and thousands of these books. So stay in touch. We'll give information out about that, but we're just going to give a ton of them out to help people make a difference.
That's so cool.
And yours, what's our best approach there for finding this and staying connected with you? And
So I've actually created a 50 plus recipe cookbook to
wow,
give away in anticipation of Women, Food, and Desire coming out. It's called the Cravings Cure Cookbook. 50 plus recipes to help you answer your cravings in a healthy way. So I believe all of the recipes are totally in line with what you recommend for people. They're free of the toxic six, no gluten, soy, dairy, corn, sugar, caffeine, alcohol, all those things not present. And I want people to have some tangible recipes to start putting these ideas into action, like really good, simple food that tastes yummy, that it's like, oh, this is healthy for me, and like it's totally hitting that sweet spot craving that I have. All the root vegetables, like how to cook all these foods and get that sweet flavor that we really crave, or fat, or even salt. So yeah, so that's going to be at womenfoodanddesire.com. People can go and download that, and then they'll find out when the book's coming out in January. They can pre-order it there.
womenfoodanddesire.com.
Yeah.
Easy thing. I
Yeah.
can't wait to get those recipes myself. Those sound really good. Especially I love root vegetables.
Oh man, me too. It's I've been maybe I've been going over the top. I've been putting beets in hummus. I've been
Wow.
putting sweet potatoes in steel cut oatmeal. I mean, it's just okay. I'm like, all right, maybe it's a little too much.
That's totally cool.
So thank you so much, Alan.
Thanks again, Alex. We'll talk real soon, everyone.